Bakersfield, California, 1990. 17-year-old Tyler Martinez disappeared from his skateboard route home from school. For 4 years, his mother searched, her hope burning like a candle against the suffocating darkness of not knowing. The police had theories, leads that went nowhere, and no idea that the answer to their most puzzling case was hidden in a basement workshop just 8 blocks from Tyler's high school. Before we begin, thank you for watching. I'd love to know in the comments where you're watching from and what the weather's like there. It means everything to know you're here with me, sharing these stories that need to be told. We're in this together. The summer of 1990 painted Bakersfield in shades of dust and heat, a relentless season that seemed to mirror the restless energies of 17-year-old Tyler Martinez. For him, the world stretched out like an endless highway of possibilities. He was standing at the threshold of his senior year, eager to sprint toward whatever came next. His days moved to a rhythm of controlled chaos. Morning classes at Bakersfield High School, afternoon shifts at Tony's Auto Parts, and the precious hours in between spent on his skateboard, carving through the suburban streets with the fluid grace of someone who'd found his element. The Martinez house on Oleander Avenue was more than just a home. It was a fortress of unconditional love and fierce pride. The smell of fresh tortillas and coffee perpetually filled the air. Maria Martinez, his mother, worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, her hands always busy, always caring. She was the architect of Tyler's world, building it brick by brick with sacrifice and determination. "You're going to be somebody, mijo," she would tell him, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "College is your ticket out of here. Don't waste it." Tyler carried that confidence like armor. He was smart, curious, and driven by a hunger to understand how things worked. His bedroom walls were covered with sketches of engines and mechanical drawings. He dreamed of studying engineering at UCLA, of building bridges and designing machines that could change the world. On that particular Thursday in late September, the desert heat was beginning to give way to the first whispers of fall. Tyler had spent the afternoon at Tony's, elbow deep in a carburetor repair. The satisfaction of fixing something broken, of bringing dead metal back to life, never got old. He called his mother from the payphone outside the shop. "Heading home now, Mom," he said, tucking the phone between his ear and shoulder as he adjusted his skateboard under his arm. "Should be there in 30 minutes. Need me to pick up anything?" "No, baby. Just get home safe," Maria replied, her voice warm with that familiar mix of love and worry. "I made enchiladas. Your favorite. You're the best. See you soon." Those were the last words she would hear from her son for 4 years. As Tyler pushed off on his skateboard, the familiar streets of his neighborhood blurred past in comfortable routine. The route home from Tony's was muscle memory. Past the elementary school, through the residential area, across the small park where he'd learned to ride his bike. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and somewhere in those shadows waited a predator who had been watching, learning, planning. The man had noticed Tyler weeks ago. The regular schedule, the predictable route, the moments of vulnerability when the teenager was alone with his thoughts and his skateboard. He looked ordinary enough, a middle-aged guy in work clothes driving a faded blue pickup truck, the kind of person who blended seamlessly into the background of any American town. Tyler never saw him coming. The intersection of Panorama Drive and Chester Avenue was unremarkable in every way. A 4-way stop in a residential neighborhood where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved from their driveways. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, which made it perfect for what was about to unfold. Tyler was cruising down Chester, his skateboard wheels humming against the asphalt, when the faded blue pickup truck pulled alongside him. The driver rolled down his window with a mechanical whir that cut through the late afternoon quiet. "Hey there, son," the man called out, his voice friendly and casual. "You wouldn't happen to know where Olive Drive is, would you? I'm supposed to pick up some furniture, but I'm turned around something fierce. Tyler slowed his skateboard, one foot dragging to bring him to a stop. The man looked harmless enough, maybe 45, wearing a flannel shirt and a John Deere cap pulled low over graying hair. His truck bed was empty, except for some moving blankets and rope, which supported his story. Olive Drive? Yeah, it's about 6 blocks that way, Tyler said, pointing north. You'll want to take a right on Panorama, then left when you hit the railroad tracks. Appreciate it, the man said, then paused as if considering something. Actually, I don't suppose you'd mind hopping in and showing me. I'm terrible with directions, and I promised my wife I'd be back before dark. Happy to give you a ride wherever you're headed. Tyler hesitated. His mother's voice echoed in his head. All those warnings about strangers, about being careful, about trusting his instincts. But this felt different. The guy seemed genuinely lost, genuinely grateful for help. And Tyler was raised to be helpful, to lend a hand when someone needed it. I guess I could show you real quick, Tyler said, picking up his skateboard. I live just a few blocks past there anyway. The man's smile was warm and relieved. You're a lifesaver, kid. Hop on in. Tyler opened the passenger door and climbed into the truck, setting his skateboard between his knees. The interior smelled like coffee and cigarettes, with a pine air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Everything seemed normal, ordinary. Name's Frank, the man said as he pulled away from the curb. Frank Morrison. What's yours? Tyler Martinez. Nice to meet you, Tyler. You from around here? Born and raised, Tyler replied, settling back in the seat. You take this next right. But Frank didn't take the right. He continued straight, accelerating slightly. Hey, you missed the turn, Tyler said, a small note of concern creeping into his voice. Did I? Frank glanced in the rearview mirror. Sorry about that. These suburban streets all look the same to me. Tyler felt the first flutter of genuine alarm when Frank made no move to turn around. Instead, he took a left onto Highway 58, heading away from town. Where are we going? Tyler asked, his hand moving instinctively to the door handle. This isn't the way to Olive Drive. Change of plans, son, Frank said, and his voice was different now. Colder. The friendly facade had dropped away like a discarded mask. You just sit tight and keep quiet. Tyler pulled on the door handle. Nothing happened. Child safety locks, he realized with growing panic. He was trapped. Let me out, Tyler demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Let me out right now. Frank didn't answer. He just kept driving, taking them further from Bakersfield with each passing mile. Tyler's skateboard, his lifeline to freedom and normalcy, sat useless between his knees as the landscape outside blurred past. Back home, Maria Martinez was setting the table for dinner when she first glanced at the clock. Tyler was rarely late without calling, especially on a school night. She told herself he was probably just talking to friends, maybe stopped to help someone with a car problem. That was Tyler, always willing to lend a hand. But as the minutes ticked by and turned into an hour, worry began to gnaw at her stomach. She called Tony's Auto Parts, but they said Tyler had left at his usual time. She called his friends, his girlfriend, anyone who might know where he was. No one had seen him. By the time darkness fell over Bakersfield, Maria Martinez knew in her bones that something terrible had happened to her son. The enchiladas sat cold on the table, untouched, as she paced the kitchen and waited for a phone call that would never come. The call came into the Bakersfield Police Department at 11:47 p.m. Maria Martinez's voice was strained with panic as she explained to the dispatcher that her 17-year-old son had vanished. He was supposed to be home for dinner. He never missed dinner. Something was terribly wrong. The initial response was textbook, but frustrating. 2 patrol officers arrived at the Martinez house, took down Tyler's description, and asked the standard questions. Had he been acting strangely lately? Was he having problems at school? Did he have a girlfriend he might have run off with? Maria's answers were swift and certain. No to all of it. Tyler was focused, responsible, excited about his senior year. He had plans, dreams, a future mapped out in college brochures spread across his bedroom desk. This wasn't a runaway situation. This was something else entirely. Detective Sarah Chen caught the case the next morning. She was 34, sharp as a blade, and had a reputation for not giving up on missing persons cases. When she walked into Tyler's bedroom, she saw immediately what his mother meant. This was the room of a young man with direction. Engineering textbooks, skateboard magazines, a bulletin board covered with UCLA information and scholarship applications. "Tell me about yesterday," Chen said, sitting across from Maria at the kitchen table. "Every detail, no matter how small." Maria recounted Tyler's routine. School, work at Tony's Auto Parts, then the skateboard ride home. Always the same route, always reliable. She'd called his workplace, his friends, anyone who might know something. No one had seen him after he left Tony's. Chen drove the route herself, studying the suburban streets with a cop's eye. Chester Avenue to Panorama Drive, through the residential neighborhood where nothing ever happened. She canvassed the area, knocking on doors, showing Tyler's school photo to neighbors. Most people hadn't seen anything unusual, but Mrs. Henderson, who lived at the corner of Chester and Panorama, remembered something that made Chen's pulse quicken. "There was a truck," the elderly woman said, squinting as she tried to recall. "Blue, I think. Kinda beat up. I noticed it because it was going real slow, like the driver was lost or looking for something. This was around 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock. Did you see the driver? Just a man, wearing a cap. Nothing special about him. It wasn't much, but it was something." Chen put out a BOLO alert for a blue pickup truck and organized search parties to comb the areas around Tyler's route. Local news picked up the story, and Tyler's face appeared on television screens across the Central Valley. But as the days passed without a trace, without a witness, without any solid leads, the investigation began to feel like grasping smoke. Tyler Martinez had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. Frank Morrison watched the news coverage from his living room, 20 miles outside Bakersfield, in the small desert town of Mojave. He felt nothing but mild interest as Tyler's mother pleaded for information, for her son's safe return. The boy was in the basement now, in the workshop Frank had spent months preparing. Soundproofed walls, reinforced locks, everything necessary to keep his prize secure. Frank was a patient man. He'd been watching Tyler for weeks, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect opportunity. He knew the police would search frantically at first, then gradually move on to other cases as the trail grew cold. That's how these things worked. People disappeared all the time, especially teenagers. Most were never found. But Frank had no intention of Tyler ever being found. This was just the beginning of a very long game, and Frank Morrison always played to win. The basement workshop beneath Frank Morrison's house in Mojave had been meticulously planned for months. What had once been a simple storage space had been transformed into something far more sinister. Soundproofed walls lined with old mattresses muffled any noise. A single overhead bulb provided harsh, unforgiving light. In the corner sat a modified storage room, barely larger than a closet, with a heavy wooden door and multiple locks. Tyler had been unconscious when Frank carried him down the stairs. The chloroform-soaked rag had done its job during the truck ride, ensuring no struggle, no witnesses, no complications. When Tyler finally woke up, the disorientation was complete. The familiar world of Bakersfield High School, Tony's Auto Parts, and his mother's enchiladas felt like a distant dream. "Welcome to your new home, son," Frank said, his voice echoing in the concrete space. He was sitting calmly in a folding chair, watching Tyler with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Tyler's hands were zip-tied behind his back, his legs bound with rope. His skateboard was nowhere to be seen. The teenager's mind raced, trying to process what had happened, trying to find some logical explanation for this nightmare. "Please," Tyler said, his voice hoarse. "Please just let me go. My mom, she'll be worried sick. I won't tell anyone what happened. I promise." Frank smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, Tyler, you don't understand yet. Nobody's looking for you where you are now. And your mother." He paused, savoring the moment. "Well, she's going to have to learn to live with disappointment." The psychological games began immediately. Frank explained that Tyler was now part of something bigger, something important. He spoke of a network, a brotherhood of men who understood that society's rules didn't apply to exceptional people like themselves. Tyler was chosen, Frank claimed, because he represented everything pure and promising that the corrupt world sought to destroy. "This isn't kidnapping," Frank said with disturbing conviction. "This is salvation. I'm saving you from a world that would have chewed you up and spit you out. College, career, marriage, kids, all of it leading to the same meaningless grave. Here, with me, you have purpose." Tyler listened in growing horror as Frank outlined the rules of this new existence. Complete obedience, no questions, no attempts to escape. In return, Tyler would be fed, sheltered, and protected from the chaos of the outside world. Frank spoke as if he were offering a gift, as if Tyler should be grateful for this grotesque mercy. The small storage room would be Tyler's space when Frank wasn't around. It contained a thin mattress, a bucket, and nothing else. No windows, no light except what filtered under the door. It was a box designed to break the human spirit, to reduce a vibrant teenager to something manageable and compliant. "The sooner you accept your situation," Frank said, as he prepared to lock Tyler inside for the first time, "the easier this will be for both of us. Fight it, and you'll only make yourself suffer more." As the heavy door closed and multiple locks clicked into place, Tyler was plunged into a darkness more complete than anything he'd ever experienced. The silence was suffocating, broken only by his own rapid breathing and the hammering of his heart. Above ground, in the normal world that now seemed impossibly far away, Detective Sarah Chen was expanding her search. The blue pickup truck Mrs. Henderson had seen was proving elusive. Hundreds of similar vehicles were registered in Kern County alone, and checking each one was a monumental task with limited resources. But Chen had a feeling about this case. Something about Tyler's disappearance felt different from the typical runaway situations she'd handled. The boy had too much to live for, too much to look forward to. Someone had taken him, and whoever it was had done it with planning and precision. What she didn't know was that 20 miles away, in a soundproof basement workshop, Tyler Martinez was beginning the longest night of his life, listening to Frank Morrison's footsteps moving around above his head like a grim countdown to morning. 3 weeks into Tyler's captivity, Frank Morrison had established a routine that was designed to systematically dismantle the teenager's sense of reality. The pattern was as precise as clockwork and as devastating as acid on metal. Every morning, Frank would descend the basement stairs carrying a tray of food, usually cold oatmeal, a piece of bread, and lukewarm water. He would unlock the storage room where Tyler spent most of his time and deliver the meal with the demeanor of someone performing a sacred ritual. "Good morning, son," Frank would say, his voice carrying that same disturbing warmth he'd used in the truck. "Sleep well? I hope you're beginning to understand how much better this is than the chaos you left behind." Tyler had tried everything in those first weeks. He'd screamed until his voice was raw, knowing the soundproofed walls made it pointless. He'd thrown himself against the door until his shoulders were bruised and bleeding. He'd refused food, thinking hunger might give him some small measure of control. Nothing worked. Frank simply waited, patient as a spider, for Tyler's resistance to burn itself out. The psychological manipulation was subtle but relentless. Frank would bring newspaper clippings about crime in Bakersfield, about drug busts at the high school, about car accidents involving teenagers. "See what I saved you from?" he would say, spreading the articles on the floor like evidence in a trial. "Your friends are getting arrested, getting killed, throwing their lives away. But you're safe here." He would talk about Tyler's mother with a mixture of pity and contempt. "She's probably moved on by now," Frank would muse during their forced conversations. "Started dating again. It's what they all do. A mother's love isn't as eternal as they pretend. Give it a few more months, and she'll pack up your room, sell your skateboard, try to forget you ever existed." The cruelest weapon in Frank's arsenal was hope. Every few days, he would hint at the possibility of freedom. "When you truly understand what I'm trying to teach you," he would say, "when you appreciate the gift I've given you by removing you from that toxic world, then we can discuss the next phase of your education." But Tyler was 17, not 7. His mind, despite the psychological assault, retained enough clarity to recognize the manipulation for what it was. He began to understand that Frank needed him to break, needed him to surrender his identity completely. The realization gave him something to hold on to, a core of defiance that Frank couldn't reach. Late at night, locked in the storage room, Tyler would perform mental exercises. He would recite his mother's phone number over and over, scared he might forget it. He would remember every detail of his bedroom, his friends' faces, the smell of motor oil at Tony's Auto Parts. These memories became his armor against Frank's psychological warfare. Above ground, Detective Sarah Chen was hitting dead end after dead end. The blue pickup truck had led nowhere. Too common, too many possibilities. The case file was growing thicker, but with questions rather than answers. Tyler Martinez had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. What Chen didn't know was that 20 miles away, in a soundproofed basement, Tyler was fighting the most important battle of his life, not for his freedom, that seemed impossible now, but for his sanity, his identity, his very soul. Frank Morrison thought he was breaking a teenager. Instead, he was forging something harder and more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. 6 months had passed since Tyler Martinez disappeared from the streets of Bakersfield, and Frank Morrison had settled into a routine that satisfied his deepest psychological needs. The basement workshop had become his kingdom. Tyler, his unwilling subject, in an experiment of complete control. Frank was what criminal psychologists would later term a gray man, utterly unremarkable in every measurable way. In the small desert town of Mojave, he was simply another middle-aged maintenance worker at the nearby military base. His neighbors barely knew his name. The grocery store clerks processed his purchases without a second glance. He attended the same diner every Sunday morning, ordered the same breakfast, left the same modest tip. This invisibility was Frank's greatest asset. In a world where monsters were expected to look monstrous, Frank Morrison looked like somebody's uncle, somebody's co-worker, somebody's neighbor. He drove to work, paid his bills, maintained his house. The perfect camouflage for the horror unfolding in his basement. Tyler had stopped counting days. Without windows, without sunlight, without any normal markers of time, his world had contracted to the rhythm of Frank's visits. Food arrived. The overhead bulb turned on and off according to Frank's whims. Conversations were forced upon him, monologues really, where Frank would expound on his twisted philosophy of salvation through captivity. "The world above us is diseased," Frank would say during these sessions, his voice carrying the conviction of a street preacher. "Your mother has probably forgotten you by now, moved on, started over. That's what people do. They adapt, they survive, they forget. But I remember you, Tyler. I'm the only one who truly sees your value." The psychological warfare was systematic and devastating. Frank would bring down newspapers, pointing to stories of teenage crime, drug arrests, car accidents. "Look what I saved you from," he would say. "Your classmates are destroying themselves while you're here, safe, protected from all that chaos." But Tyler had learned to build walls in his mind. During the endless hours alone in the storage room, he would recite multiplication tables, remember every detail of his mother's face, replay conversations with friends. These mental exercises became his lifeline, his way of preserving the person Frank was trying to erase. Above ground, Detective Sarah Chen was facing the brutal reality of cold cases. The Tyler Martinez file had been moved to a lower priority status, though she still worked it during quiet moments. The blue pickup truck had never materialized. No witnesses had come forward. No body had been found. Tyler Martinez had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. Maria Martinez had not given up. She couldn't. Every evening after her shift at the hospital, she would drive Tyler's skateboard route, hoping to spot something the police had missed. She had started a support group for parents of missing children, turning her grief into action, her desperation into purpose. 20 miles away, in a soundproofed basement, her son was fighting the most important battle of his life, not for escape, which seemed impossible, but for his sanity, his identity, his very soul. Frank Morrison thought he was creating the perfect victim. Instead, he was forging something far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. 2 years had passed since Tyler Martinez vanished from the streets of Bakersfield. In that time, Frank Morrison had perfected the art of psychological imprisonment, constructing an elaborate mythology designed to keep Tyler compliant and hopeless. The breakthrough came during Tyler's third winter in the basement workshop. Frank had been building toward this moment for months, carefully laying the groundwork for his most devastating lie yet. "I need to tell you something important, son," Frank said during one of their forced conversations. His tone was different, more serious, more conspiratorial. "Something about why you're really here." Tyler, now 19 but looking years older, sat on the thin mattress in his storage room prison. The defiance in his eyes had dulled, but never fully disappeared. He listened without speaking, a survival strategy he'd learned long ago. "I'm not working alone," Frank continued, settling into his usual folding chair. "There's an organization, Tyler, a network of people who understand that society is broken beyond repair. We rescue young people like you before the world corrupts them completely." The lie was elaborate and terrifying in its scope. Frank described a shadowy group with members in law enforcement, government, even Tyler's old high school. They had been watching Tyler for years, Frank claimed, identifying him as someone worth saving from the toxic influences of modern society. "Your mother," Frank said, watching Tyler's face carefully. "She's being watched too. Protected, actually. As long as you remain here, accepting the gift we've given you, she stays safe. But if you try to escape, if you betray our trust..." He let the threat hang in the air like poison. This was Frank's masterpiece of manipulation. He had transformed Tyler's captivity from selfish imprisonment into noble sacrifice. Tyler wasn't just surviving for himself anymore. He was protecting his mother through his compliance. To reinforce the lie, Frank began staging elaborate deceptions. He would leave fake newspaper clippings describing mysterious accidents that had befallen other rescued teenagers who had tried to escape. He would take phone calls in Tyler's presence, speaking in coded language to imaginary network members about subjects and monitoring protocols. The psychological prison Frank constructed was more secure than any physical walls. Even when Tyler was allowed brief moments outside the storage room, he never attempted to flee. The organization, Frank had convinced him, was everywhere. To run would mean signing his mother's death warrant. Meanwhile, in Bakersfield, Detective Sarah Chen had been promoted to lieutenant, But the Tyler Martinez case continued to haunt her. The file sat in the cold case archives, officially inactive, but never forgotten. Maria Martinez still called the police department monthly, asking if there were any new leads, any reason for hope. Chen would always take these calls personally. She would listen to Maria's voice, still strong, still determined after 2 years of not knowing, and promise that Tyler hadn't been forgotten. But privately, Chen had begun to fear the worst. Cases that went this cold, with this little evidence, rarely had happy endings. What Chen couldn't know was that 20 miles away, in a soundproofed basement workshop, Tyler Martinez was fighting a different kind of war. Not for his physical freedom, which seemed impossible, but for his sanity, his identity, and his will to survive. Frank Morrison thought he had created the perfect victim. Instead, he was nurturing something far more dangerous, a young man with nothing left to lose and time to plan. 3 years into Tyler's captivity, Frank Morrison had achieved something he considered his greatest accomplishment: the complete psychological domination of another human being. Tyler no longer fought, no longer screamed, no longer even hoped for rescue. He had become the perfect victim, compliant, dependent, and utterly convinced that his imprisonment was the only thing standing between his mother and certain death. The transformation had been gradual but devastating. Frank's web of lies about the mysterious organization had grown so complex and detailed that even Tyler, despite his intelligence, found it impossible to distinguish truth from fiction. Frank would return from his maintenance job at the nearby military base with updates from his handlers, stories of other rescued teenagers who had tried to escape and paid the ultimate price, along with their families. They found Tommy Phillips 3 states away, Frank would report with manufactured sadness. Tried to run last month. The organization doesn't tolerate betrayal, Tyler. His whole family paid for his mistake. House fire. Made to look like an accident, of course. These fabricated reports served a dual purpose. They reinforced Tyler's belief in the organization's reach and power, while simultaneously providing him with a twisted sense of purpose. His captivity wasn't meaningless suffering. It was a noble sacrifice protecting his mother from harm. Frank had also introduced new elements to maintain psychological control. He began allowing Tyler brief periods outside the storage room, but only during specific hours when the surveillance shifts changed. These moments of relative freedom were calculated rewards for good behavior, making Tyler grateful for basic human dignities he had once taken for granted. The most insidious aspect of Frank's control was how he had made Tyler complicit in his own imprisonment. Tyler now actively helped maintain the basement workshop, cleaning and organizing the space that served as his prison. He would remind Frank when supplies were running low, suggest improvements to the security measures, even express concern when Frank seemed tired or stressed. Stockholm Syndrome had taken root completely. Tyler's survival instincts had rewired themselves around pleasing his captor, reading Frank's moods, anticipating his needs. The 17-year-old who had once dreamed of engineering bridges had become an expert in the psychology of his own oppressor. Meanwhile, Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen had never stopped thinking about the Tyler Martinez case, even as her caseload grew and other investigations demanded attention. The file remained on her desk, a constant reminder of the one that got away. She would occasionally drive past the Martinez house, noting how Maria had maintained Tyler's room exactly as he'd left it. The faded, missing posters still taped to telephone poles throughout the neighborhood. What Chen couldn't know was that her instincts had been right from the beginning. 20 miles away in Mojave, Tyler Martinez was very much alive, trapped in a psychological prison so complete and sophisticated that escape had become literally unthinkable. Frank Morrison had created his masterpiece of human control, turning a bright teenager into a willing participant in his own captivity. But even the most perfect systems contained the seeds of their own destruction, and Tyler's mind, damaged but not broken, was quietly filing away every detail, every inconsistency, every moment of Frank's guard being down. The organization that Frank claimed was watching everyone had one critical blind spot. They didn't know that their perfect victim was slowly, carefully beginning to watch them back. The mistake that would ultimately unravel Frank Morrison's perfect system of control was so small, so seemingly insignificant, that he never even realized he'd made it. It happened during Tyler's 4th winter in captivity. Frank had returned from his shift at the military base, bringing with him the usual fabricated reports about the mysterious organization. But this time, fatigue and overconfidence made him careless. "Bad news from Phoenix," Frank announced, settling into his folding chair. "Another one of our subjects tried to run. Jeremy Walsh, 17 years old. They found him and his whole family dead in what looked like a car accident on Interstate 40. Tyler nodded with the practiced compliance of someone who had learned not to react emotionally to such reports. But something nagged at him, a memory he couldn't quite place. 3 days later, Frank made the same mistake again. "Tragic development in Denver," he said. "Young woman named Sarah Chen tried to contact the authorities. The organization had to eliminate her and her parents. Made it look like a home invasion." Sarah Chen. The name hit Tyler like a physical blow, though he was careful not to show it on his face. He knew that name. Detective Sarah Chen had been mentioned in the newspapers Frank occasionally brought down, the lead investigator on Tyler's own missing person case back in Bakersfield. For the first time in years, Tyler felt something crack in the prison Frank had built around his mind. If Sarah Chen was supposed to be one of the organization's victims, how could she have been investigating Tyler's disappearance in Bakersfield? The logic didn't work. The story didn't fit. That night, alone in his storage room prison, Tyler began to think more clearly than he had in years. He started examining Frank's stories with the analytical mind that had once dreamed of engineering bridges. The dates didn't align. The geography was impossible. Most damning of all, Frank had claimed the organization was protecting Tyler's mother by keeping her under surveillance. But he'd also said they routinely killed the families of escaped subjects. The realization came slowly, then all at once. There was no organization. There never had been. Frank Morrison was just one man, a sick, manipulative predator who had constructed an elaborate fantasy to keep Tyler compliant. The network of watchers, the powerful brotherhood, the constant surveillance. All of it was lies. Tyler's hands shook as the full scope of Frank's deception became clear. His mother wasn't being protected. She was out there somewhere, still searching, still hoping, still believing her son might come home. And Tyler had spent 4 years passively accepting his imprisonment, believing he was somehow noble in his sacrifice. The rage that filled Tyler in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was pure, focused fury at being manipulated so completely, at having his love for his mother weaponized against him, at losing 4 years of his life to a madman's fantasy. But Tyler had learned patience in his captivity. He had learned to hide his thoughts, to present the face Frank wanted to see. So he buried his newfound clarity deep inside himself and began to plan. Frank Morrison thought he had created the perfect victim. Instead, he had created something far more dangerous, a young man with nothing left to lose and time to prepare for revenge. Meanwhile, Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen, very much alive despite Frank's fictional reports, was reviewing the Tyler Martinez file once again. 4 years had passed, but she had never stopped believing that somewhere out there, Tyler was still alive, still waiting to be found. The weeks following Tyler's revelation moved with agonizing slowness, but for the first time in 4 years, he had something Frank Morrison didn't know about. Hope based on truth rather than lies. Tyler began to study Frank with the analytical mind that had once dreamed of engineering bridges. He cataloged every habit, every routine, every moment of vulnerability. Frank left for his maintenance job at the military base every weekday at 6 a.m., returning around 3 p.m. He grocery shopped on Saturdays. He watched television upstairs every evening from 7 to 10 p.m., during which time the basement fell silent, except for the muffled sounds of canned laughter and commercial jingles. Most importantly, Tyler realized that Frank's elaborate security measures were designed to keep a compliant victim contained, not to restrain someone actively plotting escape. The locks on the storage room door were heavy, but old. The soundproofing that had once felt like a tomb now seemed like an advantage. If he could get out, no one would hear Frank's cries for help. But Tyler's planning went beyond simple escape. 4 years of psychological torture had forged something harder and more dangerous than Frank could have imagined. Tyler didn't just want to run. He wanted Frank to face consequences for what he'd done. He wanted his mother to know he was alive. He wanted Detective Sarah Chen, very much alive despite Frank's lies, to finally solve the case that had haunted her. The breakthrough came during one of Frank's staged phone calls to his fictional organization contacts. Tyler was allowed out of the storage room for his weekly cleaning duties when Frank answered what he claimed was an urgent call from his handlers. "Yes, I understand," Frank said into the phone, his voice tense with manufactured authority. "The Phoenix situation has been contained. No, there were no witnesses." But Tyler was close enough to hear what Frank couldn't, the dial tone humming through the receiver. Frank was talking to no one. The elaborate performance was pure theater, designed to maintain the illusion of the all-powerful organization. That night, alone in his storage room prison, Tyler Martinez began to plan not just his escape, but Frank Morrison's downfall. The scared 17-year-old who had climbed into a stranger's truck 4 years ago was gone. In his place was something forged in darkness and deception, a survivor with nothing left to lose and every reason to fight back. Meanwhile, Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen was experiencing one of those investigative instincts that couldn't be explained but couldn't be ignored. After 4 years, something was pulling her back to the Tyler Martinez case. She found herself driving past the old search areas, reviewing witness statements, wondering what she might have missed. 20 miles away in Mojave, Frank Morrison went to sleep that night, believing his psychological masterpiece was complete and secure. He had no idea that his perfect victim was lying awake in the darkness, counting the hours until morning and planning the beginning of the end. The morning of Tyler's escape began like any other in Frank Morrison's carefully controlled world. Frank left for his maintenance shift at the military base at exactly 6 a.m., coffee mug in hand, completely unaware that his perfect victim had spent the night working on the lock mechanism with a piece of metal stripped from the storage room's ventilation grate. Tyler had learned patience in his 4 years of captivity, but now that patience served a different purpose. He waited until he heard Frank's truck pull out of the driveway, then counted to 60 before beginning his work on the final lock. The old mechanism, designed to keep a compliant prisoner contained rather than stop a determined escape, gave way after 20 minutes of careful manipulation. For the first time in 4 years, Tyler Martinez stood in the basement workshop as a free man. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to burst through the basement door and sprint toward freedom. But Tyler had learned to think strategically in his captivity, and he knew that simply escaping wouldn't be enough. Frank Morrison needed to face consequences for what he'd done. Tyler moved quickly but methodically through the house above. In Frank's bedroom, he found a loaded pistol in the nightstand drawer, evidence of Frank's paranoia about his fictional organization. More importantly, Tyler discovered Frank's real identity documents, work schedules, and a box hidden under the bed containing newspaper clippings about missing teenagers from across California, Nevada, and Arizona. The scope of Frank's obsession was staggering. Tyler wasn't his first victim, He was simply the one Frank had successfully captured and held. The others had been fantasies, targets Frank had stalked, but never taken. Until now. Tyler pocketed the gun and gathered the evidence, then positioned himself to wait. He had learned Frank's schedule down to the minute. His captor would return at 3:15 p.m., enter through the kitchen door, and immediately head downstairs to check on his prize. Instead, Frank would find Tyler waiting for him in the living room, armed and holding 4 years' worth of evidence. Meanwhile, Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen was following an intuition she couldn't explain. The Tyler Martinez case file lay open on her desk as she cross-referenced missing person reports from surrounding counties. Something was nagging at her, a pattern she couldn't quite see, but knew was there. 20 miles away in Mojave, Frank Morrison finished his shift and drove home, humming along to the radio. He was looking forward to his evening routine, checking on Tyler, delivering the day's fictional reports about the organization's activities, maintaining the psychological prison that had served him so well. He had no idea that his perfect victim was sitting in his living room, no longer a scared 17-year-old, but a 21-year-old survivor with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The boy who had once dreamed of building bridges had learned to build something else entirely, a plan for justice. As Frank's truck pulled into the driveway at exactly 3:15 p.m., Tyler Martinez checked the pistol one final time and prepared to reclaim his life. Frank Morrison walked through his front door at exactly 3:15 p.m., keys jingling in his hand, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse around him. The familiar routine of checking on his prize, delivering fictional reports about the organization, maintaining his psychological masterpiece, all of it was about to end. "Hello, Frank?" The voice came from his living room, calm and steady. Frank froze, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. That voice was impossible. Tyler was locked in the basement storage room where he belonged. Tyler was broken, compliant, dependent. But when Frank turned toward the living room, there sat Tyler Martinez, no longer the scared 17-year-old from 4 years ago, but a 21-year-old man holding Frank's own pistol with steady hands. "Surprised?" Tyler asked, his voice carrying none of the fear Frank had grown accustomed to hearing. "You shouldn't be. 4 years is a long time to study someone's weaknesses." Frank's mind raced, trying to process this impossible reversal. The Tyler sitting before him was different, harder, colder, but also strangely at peace. The psychological prison Frank had so carefully constructed had cracked, and from those cracks had emerged something Frank never expected. A survivor. "The organization will," Frank began, falling back on his most powerful lie. "There is no organization," Tyler interrupted, and his smile was sharp as a blade. "Detective Sarah Chen is alive and well in Bakersfield. All those people you claimed were eliminated, all those victims of your fictional network. I figured it out, Frank. You're just one sick man who got lucky for 4 years." Frank's face went white. His greatest weapon, the elaborate mythology that had kept Tyler compliant, was revealed as the house of cards it had always been. Without that psychological control, Frank Morrison was just a middle-aged maintenance worker facing an armed victim who had every reason to want revenge. "Now here's what's going to happen," Tyler said, reaching for the phone with his free hand while keeping the gun trained on Frank. "I'm going to call Detective Chen. You're going to sit there quietly while I do it. And then you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage, which is more mercy than you showed me." The call connected on the second ring. "Lieutenant Chen? This is Tyler Martinez. I'm alive, I'm free, and I have the man who took me." 16 hours later, Tyler Martinez walked up the front steps of his childhood home on Oleander Avenue for the first time in 4 years. Maria Martinez opened the door, and for a moment, mother and son simply stared at each other. She seeing the man her boy had become. He seeing the woman who had never stopped believing he would come home. When they embraced, 4 years of grief and hope and unshakable love collapsed into a single moment of joy that neither would ever forget. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen watched from her patrol car as Frank Morrison was loaded into a prison transport van. The Tyler Martinez case, the one that had haunted her for years, was finally closed. But more than that, it was resolved in the way she had never dared hope, with the victim alive, free, and strong enough to ensure his captor faced justice. Frank Morrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his cell, surrounded by the bars and concrete that would contain him until his death, he finally understood what Tyler had endured in that basement storage room. The difference was that Frank Morrison had chosen his fate. Tyler Martinez had chosen to survive it. And in a small house on Oleander Avenue, a young man who had once dreamed of building bridges learned that sometimes the most important thing you can build is the strength to find your way home.